and relates to people in a normal way, for instance, by smiling, pointing, nodding. It might even speak a few words. It may carry something like a walking stick or an umbrella. It cannot be seen if you shut your eyes. You don't see it then. It may appear to open or close a door or to move an object, but such interactions are found later not to have taken place. It cannot be touched. Your hand would go right through it, nor can its image be photographed. On some occasions, unusual characteristics are noted. For example, luminosity around the figure, so a kind of glow. In 1956, a study was made in which researchers noted that 85% of apparitions of persons were later found to have been deceased or dying at the time of their appearance. 85% recognized by whoever they appeared to. 78% registered an emotional bond with the person, such as spouse, family member, or friend. 70% of apparitions were seen when the one perceiving it was either in bed or had just waked up. Some 8% of apparitions of the dead communicated true information, 8%. Some were seen on 2 or more occasions, 26%, or collectively by 2 or more people, while others were visible only to the one particularly receiving the apparition. So that, again, that is information on apparition. I'm going to come back to this because next week, finally, because we're going to be talking again about evidences for life after death. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about jots. Anyone have a question or a point before we shift? Okay, jots. Tony Jinks is Australian, and he did his research in Australia, and he did a good bit of research. And he has a book, you can find it on Amazon, called Disappearing Objects. Jots, J-O-T, just one of those things, because he didn't have any other name for it, right? One example, and I'm going to read right out of his writing. One evening, August 2008, Kate drove home after work to her small suburban house situated on a quiet residential street. With her car key on the same ring as all her other keys, she selected front door key, opened the door at the same moment that her telephone rang. Knowing who it would be, she left the door open, dropped her bag to run down the hall to answer the phone. After the call, she went back to take the ring of keys out of the door and pick up her bag. The bag was there with all its contents, but the ring of keys was not. She searched and searched in vain, eventually concluding that someone must have entered the porch and snatched the keys, although the street was empty and there seemed to be no one around. Unable to find the keys, she was faced with the inconvenient and expensive business of getting new car key, changing the locks on her front door, back door, garage, mailbox, cutting a new key for her office. Within the year, she moved to a new job in another city and bought and thoroughly renovated an apartment close to the city center. One evening, she returned home, placed her new set of keys in the hallway drawer, as usual, and went into her bedroom only to see her old set of keys on the same ring on her pillow. As she said to Jinx, she felt nauseous and giddy with shock, as no one else could have entered her apartment during her absence. Now that's a striking example of a thought. Now, Jinx investigated. He says he investigated 385 personal accounts of jot claims. And he adds this to Mary Rose Barrington's book. The book that's in Amazon is called JOTT, Jot, where she also goes into some statistical evidence on these happenings. What Jinx found on investigating, trying to get together statistical evidence, what was being repeatedly and independently described by the group, in the group he investigated, and again, coming up to a fairly large group, 385 people, and adding to those the ones that Barrington had investigated. What was being repeatedly and independently described seemed to be a genuine phenomenon, despite being considered as completely impossible, as far as science and everyday common sense is concerned. The objects most frequently involved: jewelry items, rings, brooches, necklaces, single food and beverage items, keys, items of clothing, small computer items such as a USB stick and mice, television remote controls, grooming items such as combs, brushes, hair clips, tweezers, kitchen utensils, knives, forks, wristwatches, wallets, debit cards, individual coins, stationery, small tools, and so on. He found that in order of activity, the most common event were the disappearance and later reappearance of an object, often in the same place, but sometimes elsewhere in the house, the unfamiliar appearance of new object that could not be accounted for, a similar type of object replacement, and sometimes disappearance for good, never came back. As a general rule, the more recently an object has been handled and then noted as missing, the quicker it returns. Kate's experience is an exception. So Kate with the keys returning. Jinx also classified objects according to their monetary or personal value, and persons who experienced these as to whether the experience was only once or repeated over months or over years. Males and females seem roughly equally affected, although women affected more with regard to jewelry. The great majority of those experiencing these events were adults from their 20s onwards, and as far as Jinx could judge, they were ordinary members of the public who had little or no prior knowledge or interest in parapsychology. No beliefs or practice in magical phenomena, had no idea that this experience had happened to anyone else, and were baffled and often emotionally disturbed as to their own state of mind. What happened? No significant difference was found between levels of education, types of career or occupation, and frequency of reported occurrence. As for population prevalence, these 385 experiences were self-selecting in that they were so unable to find normal explanation for their experiences that they responded to requests for such accounts and eventually contacted Jinx, or he contacted them. The same applies to 185 cases reported by Barrington. When 80 people volunteered to take part in an anonymous survey without knowing the purpose of the study, and were asked if they had ever experienced an incident such as a strangely behaving object, and if so, what was the nature of their experience. The result was completely unexpected. It had been assumed that very few, if any, such cases would be reported. But 42 participants in the study, 52%, were reported having had an experience, that is a jot experience. And this implies that maybe at least half of the adult population have experienced an unexplainable object disappearance, reappearance, appearance, or replacement. Dismissed it in baffled exploration at the time as just one of those things, a jot, because there seemed to be no explanation, while sensing that something genuinely mysterious had occurred. Analysis of jot behavior has demonstrated several characteristics apply to all objects. If a key had a patch of rust or was slightly bent before disappearance, that's how it reappeared. In some cases, the appearance of a completely new object or a similar replacement object was always a complete surprise. Now here I come to the end of the reports, and beyond this we have explanations. How do you explain it? And the best I have seen in attempts to explain it have to do with quantum reality, the reality of quantum physics, the fluctuations below our solid world, the things are very much in flux. And theory then, but there's no way of getting from one to the other, just pure speculation, that there is a difference between possibility and actuality, where over this line, perhaps the quantum line, that line is permeable. That is, it's not all as stable as it might absolutely seem to be. That the jot events is totally mysterious. That is becoming the only way I have seen that anybody has tried to explain it. Now, I had a jot experience recently, and I recognize it because it's mentioned in this paper from Tony Jinks. I switched out my keyboard from my computer, and I had to replace the USB sticker. You know, to get your keyboard to connect to your computer, it's about that big. And I did, I replaced it, and I put the one that had been used, just put it right down there on the surface by the computer. And when everything was working, I went back to get it, it was gone. I looked all over for it, on the floor, all around the surface, all under and around the computer, absolutely gone. That little USB thing you stick in the computer was totally gone. That happened about 2 weeks ago. Now, I was glad that I had the new sticker that my computer worked. But really, I was baffled. Where did it go? And then what came to my mind, because I knew about this Jinx experiment, jot came to mind. Now let me ask you, anybody else think you've experienced jots? Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Want to volunteer some information? Yes, no?
Well, this was early in the summer, I discovered I didn't have my registration for my car in my wallet, always in my wallet. And I thought, oh gee, I better see if I can find it. So I went through every pile, and I have lots of piles of paper in my house. I went through every pile, paper by paper, and I found the bill for it with the number of a check I'd written. So then I looked it up on the computer, and the check had cleared, but no registration.
No registration form.
So I thought, well, I'm going to have to go out to AAA and apply for another registration for my car. And of a sudden, one day I walk into the back room and there's another pile there. And on top of the pile was the registration.
What is the registration form?
On top of the pile.
Well, you would have seen it, right?
I would, yeah.
Okay. Now, of course, you remind me that the first line of inquiry when these things happen is to say, well, I misplaced it. My wife moved it. That's always true. My wife moved it. My husband moved it. So the first line is always to suspect. You just forgot what happened to her or somebody did something. So it's the last line of thinking to come to the jail to do the job. Do you want to volunteer yours?
Driving me crazy. I have two little containers that are for a Vitamix blender, and I only have one right now. I don't know where the other one is. They only go in the dishwasher or the place where I store them or the refrigerator, usually with cheese in them. Can't find it. Cannot find this
Anywhere.
anywhere. But I've only partially looked because I keep thinking it's going to show up.
Yeah, well, it might come back.
The other thing is I have a knife block that sat on my buffet for about 4 months because I wanted to take time to learn how to use it. And so I finally, one Sunday, I got out all my knives and I just took my time and went through and sharpened everything, packed it all back up in the box, put it on the buffet, and I thought I need to find a place to put it. And I don't know where that is. So it's an object I would use frequently and an object I would use not so frequently. And then there was a head of garlic, but the cat took that one, so I just figured she found it somewhere and batted it.
Well, this may have happened to all of us, we just don't remember it or having happened. Maybe it hasn't happened at all. But
I'd love to find my objects though.
yeah. There are 2 books on Amazon. One is by Mary Rose Barrington, this English woman very much involved in psychic stuff. She was a lawyer, called Jott, J-O-T-T, that's the name of the book. And then Tony Jinks' book, Disappearing Objects, that's there too. I'm going to switch to another subject, unless you have a question. All right, new things are happening in perception of mediums, what's happening with mediums. Famously, mediums are supposed to be in touch with spirits who do things in the seance room. Of course, the seance is typically a dark room, or not entirely dark, just a dim light. And everybody's very quiet and kind of meditates, and then through the medium, things begin to happen. Table might move, strange breeze felt, temperature changes, things like this. So things happen in the room, and then an appearance, and with the appearance may come what's called ectoplasm, where something seems to come out of the mouth or out of the body of the medium and form things. It's kind of a white substance type stuff. Well, there are now 2 schools of thought about what's happening. One is the old school about the spirits. The other one is that we are causing this. That is, say, the participants in the seance are causing it. That, namely, a kind of telepathy is taking place. A group telepathy, where the people all together are creating effects that may indeed lead to an appearance. But this is a group effect through the medium. Now let me read you an example. This is called the Philip experiment. made in Toronto, 1972. This is way back in the beginning of this kind of thought that we, the participants, we who participate in a seance are the causes of what appears. The Philip experiment. A group got together and invented a person they call Philip. And they placed Philip in the 17th century. And they surrounded him, they put him in historical context. So 17th century England, time of the Puritans, or the Great Civil Wars, conflicts between the Crown and the Parliament, all of that. So, 17th century, a guy by the name of Philip. The group was seated around the table. I'm reading directly from the report. Seated around the table with initial seances yielding no contact, no communication, no phenomena. The leader, the organizer, changed the test conditions, dimming the lights, changing the environment to mimic that of a more traditional seance. Participants then began feeling a presence. Table vibrations, breezes, unexplained echoes, rapping sounds, which matched responses to questions about Philip's life. All of that invented, right? At one point, the table tilted on a single leg, and at other times it moved across the room without human contact. Although audio, video, and witness accounts document the paranormal phenomena, Philip himself never appeared. Basta. Again, isn't that fascinating? Completely invented Philip, and they get all this effect. We're seeing today in paranormal research a general shift away from the old spirits explanation to telepathy being an explanation. In this case, the explanation was group telepathy creating the effects. That telepathy is something far more powerful than we think. That some individuals are certainly more talented with it. That's been tested out. But that one of the theories is we're all subconsciously connected by a great telepathic reality. We're all in a way participate in each other in a subconscious way we don't realize. But these are theories. It's just theory. The problem is we get the experiments. If we didn't have the experiments, we wouldn't have the problem. So what do you think about that? Now, let me connect it with something else. There's another area where they think we are the ones involved in creating the effect. Poltergeist. Poltergeist is knocking, rapping. That's the typical phenomenon of a poltergeist. Maybe sometimes objects move, but typically it's knocking. And you remember my example from the first hour. John Wesley himself, founder of Methodism, reported on very objectively, scientifically, on a poltergeist event in his parents' home, which went on for some time and then it completely stopped. And he says they had searched for all kinds of explanations, like the servants played tricks on the girls in the house, and that all of that had been eliminated, but finally it just disappeared. Poltergeist, typically knocking. Polter, a German word, means to knock about. Geist, ghost. So poltergeist. Well, theory has come up and been tested in different situations that human beings are the agents causing this. For example, hostility in an environment, strong hostility, seems to have produced poltergeist effects, knocking. And this is not always the case, but seems frequently to be the case that hostility may well produce poltergeist effects. And it's coming in some way we don't understand from the people, not from the spirits, not from, unhappy dead spirits wandering around the earth, but from us, an effect coming from us. Now, it doesn't mean that always hostility produces those kinds of effects. I think maybe once I might have experienced something like that. There was no hostility, and other accounts, there's no hostility involved. But some very famous accounts do have to do with hostility. And how these things get reported, usually if we go back into the past, it's the village doctor, the doctor in a town. Doctors are often called in to examine what's going on. Maybe the people are going nuts, going crazy, whatever. Doctors very frequently are the ones reporting. So that is a new area in paranormal research. The degree to which humans are the agents in events. That's very interesting. This thing has taken off. There are writings on it, and as this with the appearance of apparitions. Things that happen that involved deceased persons. There's some debate about what exactly is causing an apparition. Now, I think the evidence is stronger for apparitions on the deceased really appearing side. The other side has not produced evidence really for that. It's just pure speculation that if it's here, maybe it's here too. There we don't have any kind of explanation other than the appearance of a deceased person to those who may be in the room at that time. So I'm going to now ask again for your input. Do you have personal experiences to mention? Anybody with a poltergeist knocking, rapping? Yes?
I don't have a knocking experience, but you mentioned like movement of objects. In my bedroom on the high armoire is a 2 or 3 foot statue or carving of 2 angels. One kind of fits into the other like a puzzle piece. And there were a number of instances where the smaller piece went from up above, high on the armor, across the room. And one time I heard it and went upstairs and it was on the floor. 2 or 3 other times it was across the room, maybe 4 or 5 feet. One time, instead of laying flat, it was on its side. And there's no explanation. I mean, I have an explanation,
Yeah.
but there's no physical explanation for how that could have come out of the place
Yes.
where it.
Movement of objects like
Right.
that, that's a category by itself. In itself, I have not prepared anything on that, but that is definitely a category for itself. Thank you. Another? Yes?
Yeah, I haven't really shared it with anyone. Not a poltergeist situation, more telepathy with my siblings. Very close to my siblings. I have an older sister and an older brother, and it's become a joke where 5 seconds before they call me, I have a strong thought of that person. And then my phone rings, and it's my sister or my brother, and it's spooky. And I can almost, I haven't perfected it, but if I think about them, and I'm like, oh, I really would like to hear from them, I almost always get a call that day. And we don't call each other every day. So it's not something like, 3:30 on a Tuesday, I'm gonna get a call. So, yeah, people I'm close with, that happens quite frequently. And then another thing, and I remember this as growing up, just thinking about somebody probably a few weeks out of the blue before they pass away. And it could be somebody I haven't thought of in years. And this just happened with somebody I went to high school with. And I'm like, why am I thinking about this person? And 2 weeks later, we find out they passed away. So those are my two.
Yeah, I think those kinds of things are quite well documented. You're not the only one. They come not under the category of poltergeist, but telepathy.
Yeah.
And experiments have been done in telepathy. But thank you very much for sharing that, because that's a classic example of telepathy, the kinds of reports I've been reading. Not at all unusual. Yeah?
Several years ago, John started a group at Providence Point, and Loda and I are in it. And it deals with exploring supernormal phenomena. And one of the members of the group is a psychologist, and she specializes in grief. And we talked about mediums in the group. And she did some research on this and personally got involved. Anyway, she said she's read a study that showed that people who go to a medium, now you have to qualify the mediums because most of them don't qualify, but the very few that do, that the study showed that people with grief benefited more from one visit to a medium than 1 year with a grief psychologist. So I've never paid much attention to mediums, but this got my attention.
Yeah, well, thank you, Walt. There was no, yeah?
I just wanted to ask about dreams.
Yes, dreams are definitely involved, included in these studies. Dreams can predict the future. Dreams can be of things happening to some loved one. Dreams are very much open to what's called telepathic influence. There have been experiments on that. One of the books on the book list, the one titled Extraordinary Knowing, gets into that area of dream research. So that's the book. There was another comment? Yes.
My dad had a number of strokes before he passed, and he eventually became nonverbal. A couple of weeks before he died, the last conversation I had with him, he said, "Karen, have you seen my dad lately?" And my grandfather who had died 20 years before. And I said, "No, Dad, I haven't." And he said, "Yes, I was just talking with him." And I said, "Dad, he's going to be so happy to be with you again."
Yes, now that's threshold experience, right? You suddenly wake up. Sometimes people with very severe brain damage. That book, Threshold, which is on the reading list, has to do with the cases like that. Talking especially about people with brain damage. And I just said people with Alzheimer's over years, where the brain has been seriously destroyed, actually, and people waking up totally lucid, talking to family, and so inexplicable, which has led, as so many of these things, to talk about the difference between mind and brain. That mind is not limited to brain, and there are books on this now, fascinating area. And certainly it has to do with life after death thoughts, that consciousness, our consciousness and personal identities are not limited to brain. There are more. There is mind. And this stuff is being investigated. Now, it's almost church time, and I don't want to keep you from going over there. I don't want to be blamed. But the great problem, and at the same time, the great positive of these experiences is that they're all anecdotal. That is to say, they're personal stories. With few exceptions, they cannot be subjected to scientific testing. The only exception to that has been telepathy. There are telepathy experiments. And if you go back to my first handout, you'll see there are testing centers, and they especially work with telepathy. And I think they have proven that there is telepathic event. But huge telepathic events, the one you're talking about where you sense your siblings are about to call, things like this. You'll never prove that scientifically, but you know it's true. The personal experience trumps, bad word, personal experience outdoes scientific testing. Personal experience, anecdote after anecdote after anecdote after anecdote. Personal experience, personal experience, personal experience. No scientific proof possible, at least up to this point.
Suggesting that things that we call paranormal events or supernormal events are actually normal events. For one thing, they are frequent enough and widely distributed enough to not fit any
Right.
statistical definition of outside the norm. They're
Yeah.
normal events.
But they are in that sense normal. Any other comment? Okay, one more session next week, and I hope to recap things with at least some more attempts at explanations.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That was my